Simon's colleague, Peter, has told him that he's a plodder, merely dependable, and needs to toughen up if he's to get anywhere. Simon's only hope of getting to the truth is to visit his estranged wife to get her assessment, but she sadly confirms his deepest fears that he has been blind his entire life to the fact that he lacks dynamism and has finally been run over by the ruthless juggernaut of the real world. Then the mysterious Scotsman Archie arrives at his door with the strange story that he has just inherited an island in the Hebrides, just a small one. The steep, depressing, and very sudden decline of Simon's life has taken a new turn. It's now become rather weird as well.
Eric, on our return to the boarding house, was wet and muddy. As usual, I had left a towel by the front door to dry him before we entered. In spite of being emotionally drained and therefore physically exhausted, years of habitual responsibility had created an obsessive need in me to do the right thing. I couldn't let Eric into the house dirty. I started the drying routine. He always sees it as a game, but although I get annoyed at his antics, I must remember that he is a dog and will never attain that unique trait held exclusively by humans, conscious responsibility. His desires as a lowly dog can only be controlled by ruthless repression from his alpha leader or Pavlovian conditioning. All animals, with only one exception, live exclusively and decisively in the present. The exception is humans. With Eric, if something makes him feel good, he will do it, oblivious of the future consequences to either himself or others. Only we superior humans have the ability to act with consideration for others. I tried to get Eric to face forward, standing between my legs. In this position, I can drape the towel over him and rub dry his head, neck, and back. Then I fold the towel around his flanks and dry his belly and the tops of his legs. Now came my favourite bit. He voluntarily lifts his legs in sequence to be dried. First his front left, then front right. As the last forepaw hits the ground, he moves forward, giving me his rear right. Then, my absolute favourite manoeuvre, he walks around in a half circle and presents his rear left leg. God, I love this little dance. Man and dog. A little harmony in my discordant life. As I opened the door, Mrs. Minnison was waiting for me. The simple regularity of my life made me easy to track down. She was a tough, short woman with strong grey hair, a matriarchal figure that would not be out of place in an East End gangster movie. Her simple clothes were much more function than fashion. She was from a world I had only recently started to notice, the underbelly of society I'd never before visited or explored. Since the traumatic fracturing of my smooth, unchallenging existence, the background noise of humanity had become uncomfortably loud. Mrs. Minnison was the loudest so far. She looked at me, and her wrinkled, bloodless mouth snapped open. "Good evening, Simon." There was an edge in her voice. I knew what it was. In my experience, Most people find the task of recovering money acutely embarrassing and cope with it in one of two ways. Either with sycophancy or single-minded ruthlessness. Mrs. Minnison, a veteran of the inner city, favoured the latter. "Rent, Simon! I need your rent!" I felt instantly uncomfortable and had an urgent need to explain myself. "Sorry, I was going to come and see you as soon as I got Eric sorted." No expression crossed her face. My feelings of discomfort gave way to angry embarrassment. "The money's in my room," I explained. A very slight smile cracked her granite face. "I'll come with you to your room, then," she insisted. The three of us made our way down the windowless corridor. I had to keep pulling Eric away from licking her naked legs. "I don't think Mrs. Minnison is in the mood, Eric," I said, although I was enjoying her displeasure. Reaching my room, I pushed the key into the lock, and Eric ran excitedly ahead of me, swinging the door violently open. "I'll just be a minute," I said over my shoulder. But my relentless debt collector was right behind me, and now standing menacingly in the entrance, holding the door open with her foot. I hated confrontation. I couldn't see the need for it. Surely people are reasonable enough to be trusted to act with honesty. I found Mrs. Minnison's social posturing totally unnecessary and very insulting. I went to a drawer in my bedside cabinet, using my body to shield what I was doing. Inside was a white envelope where I kept some cash. I removed £90, closed the drawer, and walked across to Mrs. Minnison. "There you go," I said, at last happy to be proving myself. "Thank you, Simon," she said. "And the £5 extra for the dog," she added. The use of the word dog rather than Eric seemed consciously chosen to needle me. Strangely, she appeared to thrive on being the source of upset. I gave her £5 from my pocket, and she left the room without further comment. Mission accomplished, I suppose. The door swung closed with a bang. Only when I turned to give Eric his food did I realize just how tense this event had made me. I couldn't remember a time I'd felt so angry. I put some fresh water out for Eric and filled his second bowl with his food, which he inhaled. I sat on the bed and sighed, releasing some of my tension. Eric, having licked his bowl clean with the relish of a Victorian workhouse orphan, now looked at me with an expression that seemed to say, "Please, sir, can I have some more?" "Come here," I said, patting the bed. Eric ran over and jumped up next to me. He snuggled close to my side. "So what do you make of Archie?" I looked down at him, and he looked up at me with those big brown eyes. "I think there's something strange going on with him, don't you?" I gave Eric a moment to respond. His eyes were bright and his mouth open and tongue lolling in a doggy smile. He remained silent. "You're supposed to be perceptive. Come on, what do you think?" If Eric did have an insight into the mysterious Archie, he was not going to discuss it. Instead, he curled up and closed his eyes. I lay down, using his warm, furry side as a pillow, and fell asleep. I was awoken by knocking at the door. Eric was already excitedly turning in tight circles, urging me to let the caller in. I had trouble waking up, having fallen into a much deeper sleep than I'd expected. I stood up and my legs wobbled, my mind slowly returning from a darkly dreamless sleep. "Archie," I gasped, as I remembered that I had agreed to go for a drink with him, but now in the saddening dimness of the evening I wasn't sure I wanted company. I hadn't had a real conversation with anyone for 6 months, except my estranged wife, and then only painful expeditions into old wounds. I moved to the door, opened it, and Archie entered. "How's it going?" he said energetically. Then to Eric, "Hello, boy." The door to the room next to mine slammed loudly. Archie looked startled. "Who's that?" he asked. "Ah, Mrs. Candles." "Who?" "I don't know her real name. I call her Mrs. Candles because she's always burning loads of candles in her room." I laughed. "Bit of a hippie, I think." "Bit of all right, is she?" Archie said with a very male smirk. We left the building and walked down the street towards a choice of pubs. I'm not a big pub person, so although I had been staying at the boarding house for nearly 6 months, I hadn't visited any of them. As we walked, we engaged in valueless chit-chat. An hour of this conversation will contain only 1 or 2 worthwhile sentences, and even then those would probably be soon forgotten. I decided to ask something worth asking. I turned to Archie. "I don't understand why you're staying here if you have so much money." Archie stopped and looked at me, unblinkingly and directly into my eyes. I shouldn't have been so bold. I thought he was going to hit me. But then he smiled. "I don't have much money." He paused. "Yet." "What about the island?" I said. "Well, unless I sell it, that's just an asset, isn't it? I do get the rents from the tenants, but none of that's come through yet." Although his reply was detailed, something in his delivery was vague. "So, are you going to sell it?" I inquired. "Why, do you want to buy it?" "I've got nowhere to put it," I joked. "My room's too small." I hadn't been paying attention to where we were going and almost walked into the door Archie now held open for me. I ducked under his arm and entered. It was one of a small group of pubs that crowded around the crossroads just a short distance from the boarding house. A thought occurred to me. "What's the collective noun for pubs?" I asked. "What?" "You know, what do you call a group of pubs?" He looked at me as if I had lost my mind. "I have no idea," he said slowly. "I think it would be a bevy of public houses," I said proudly. Archie did not react, and I was annoyed I had wasted such a good joke. Inside, I found the usual dark brown decor of British pubs. I hadn't visited a pub since the smoking ban and was a little shocked at the untraditional clarity with which I could now see, now that the cigarette cloud had been relegated to the street. Archie indicated a vacant table and gestured to me to sit down. "No," I protested. "Let me get the drinks." "You sit down," said Archie. "My treat. What'll you have?" "A pint of bitter, thanks," I replied, then walked over to the table and sat down. I watched Archie at the bar. Although he was a big man, he seemed to be making himself small. He kept his head low and avoided eye contact. He looked like a man who didn't want to be noticed. I thought about my new friend and the fact that we probably didn't have much in common. I then started to worry that we would have nothing to talk about and end up sitting in painful silence, sipping our drinks occasionally to break the monotony. I looked around the bar and noticed at least 2 middle-aged couples engaged in that exact same purgatory. I felt sad for all the people in the world who struggled to find themselves, all the people who hadn't managed to work out who they were or what they wanted from life, and all the people like me who had looked inside themselves for the first time and were shocked by what they found. My spirit sagged, weighing me down, drawing me to that suffocating place where my stomach feels light and empty and my heart physically aches in my chest. This was usually the springboard for my feelings of suicide. I didn't want to be here, either emotionally or physically. I wanted to leave. "There you go," said Archie cheerfully, placing my pint in front of me. "What's up?" I stood up quickly, fighting back tears and rage and confusion. I need to go to the toilet." "Jesus!" "You look desperate," he said. "I always make sure I have a good dump before I go anywhere." Before he had finished his sentence, I had scanned the room, identified the sign for the gents, and was halfway there. Inside the toilet, I locked myself into an evil-smelling cubicle. Despite feeling weak, I remained standing, propped up against the door. I couldn't sit down as the toilet had no lid, and the seat was smeared with the impact marks of drunkenly aimed feces. Tears ran down my face, and my breathing had become sporadic and laboured. The anguish inside me screeched soundlessly to escape, like Monk's scream. If you don't like a smell, you can move away from it. If you don't like a taste, you can spit it out. But when you feel this wretched about your life and your future looks like simply more of the same, escape becomes impossible. How do you escape your tormentor if your tormentor is you? Is this what it's like when you reach the lowest point and you can go no lower? How do I climb out of this dark hole when the sides are slimy with the effluence of my life? How do I get a grip? The door rattled as someone outside tried the handle. I pressed my face to the door and shouted, "I'm in here! There's someone in here!" The intruder went away, and I heard them have more success with the vacant cubicle next to mine. On the door I could see graffiti scratched into the peeling painted surface. Years of evidence of the hundreds of people who had stood here just like me. Had some of them felt the same? Was this place not just a toilet, but also an arena where alcohol-soaked souls and broken spirits act out anguished scenes, admitting to themselves what they dare not show in the public bar? In my mind, I suddenly glimpsed a view of myself standing in that shithole, pouring buckets of misery over myself, and yes, that was it. I was enjoying it in some perverse way. The creative part of me had detached, risen up to the gallery, and was revelling in the show. My tears began to dry, and I laughed hollowly. How much of this is performance, and how much is real? Is my escape to recreate my situation as an anecdote told to myself, embellishing every dirty, sad detail to give it more pathos? I can do this, I thought. I can rise above this. I am not broken, but simply injured. I can get better. My life can get better. I opened the cubicle door and checked there was no one else around. The trumpeting of wind came from the other occupied cubicle. I screwed my nose up in disgust. After splashing my face with water at one of the basins, I took a few moments, then headed back to the bar. Archie sat at the table waiting for me. He looked up and grinned, then said, "I thought you had flushed yourself down the bog." I smiled and thought, "You have no idea how near I came." "This is Tommy," he said, indicating a man sitting at our table. "Oh, hello," I said. Tommy was a stick insect of a man. He wore a black leather waistcoat over a forlorn collarless shirt that had probably once been white. He sported faded tattoos of dragon-like creatures on both of his sunken cheeks and looked like he would benefit more from a good meal than the pint of lager he had in front of him. "All right," Tommy said, giving me the thumbs-up sign. "Thought you had moved in there." "I'm sorry," I said. "Thought you had moved into the shitter," he explained. "No, the boarding house is about as low as I go," I joked, trying to seem composed. "Archie's an old friend of mine. Ain't seen him in ages. Then here he is. Funny, innit?" "Small world, eh?" I said, and then continued with the first thing that came into my mind. "Has Archie told you about his island?" Archie coughed uncomfortably and started to speak, but Tommy spoke over him. "Island? What bloody island? What, like Paddy's Island? You go to Ireland? I thought you was a Scot. No, Simon's got confused. I'm not going to Ireland, Archie said, definitively and with a little menace. He then gave me a hard look. It was the look I realised I had been expecting from him. In the short time I had known Archie, his warm bonhomie had always seemed suspicious. I realised that subconsciously I had been waiting for the real Archie to emerge, a malevolent, frightening Archie, and here it was, in a simple stare. Now I not only felt uncomfortable, but scared. I thought I experienced the lowest I could go in the toilet, but somehow this was worse. Actually, I'm not feeling very well, I said, trying to engineer a fast exit. Aha, that's why you was in the shit for so long, said Tommy. Archie's stare seemed to increase in intensity. My darkening feelings deepened. I think I should go back home, I said, shakily, desperate to make this my last sentence. All right, mate, said Tommy cheerfully. Night on the bog, eh? He added. Bye then, I said, as I walked towards the exit as fast as I could without running. Outside, the cold night air did little to cool me down. Too many emotions for one evening, I thought. But at least I was out of there. At least I had some distance between me and Archie's maniacal stare. The look in his eyes had really disturbed me. I took a deep breath and started towards the boarding house. A hand grabbed my shoulder. The fear I had felt under Archie's stare returned, gripping me with intolerable pressure. Archie was behind me, with one hand on my shoulder and a beer bottle tightly gripped in the other. It was obviously a mistake mentioning the island, but I had no idea why. Somehow it had unleashed an uncontrollable anger in him. I closed my eyes and thought, this is it. This is how it ends. He's going to kill me. No self-indulgent viewing from the gallery, no self-absorbed dramatics. This is really where I die. I felt a strange sense of calm, a gratefulness that it was almost over. I looked at Archie, ready to face the end of my life. He smiled at me. Callous bastard, I thought. You can't smile at a time like this. This isn't a Bond movie. You're really going to kill me. Sorry about all that, Archie said. Look, I need to come clean about the island thing. What? I said. You see, Archie continued, there is no island. I made it up. I know it sounds silly, but it's a cover story, you see? I made simple guttural noises as weak encouragement. Look, I can't explain everything here in the street. I'll talk to you later, back at home. All right. All right, I said blandly. Sorry again, he said with a big disarming grin. Everything's okay. Don't get all paranoid. He patted me on the back in an attempt to be reassuring. Somehow I found the strength to resume my walk back to the boarding house. I felt relieved, but inwardly embarrassed that I had made such a drama of the evening. How could I believe I was about to be killed? The words sounded ridiculous even as I thought them. I know people. The world is not teeming with psychopaths. I looked back towards the pub. Archie was no longer there. The street seemed more empty than usual. I had a sudden strange feeling, as if I were the only person left on the planet.